The real estate developer pulled up to Mireille Fontaine's modest Calgary bungalow in a company-leased Porsche Cayenne. His 31-year-old girlfriend draped across the passenger seat like an accessory he'd picked up at a trade show. He had a quitclaim deed in a manila folder and 40 years of contempt for the woman who had quietly raised his ex-wife. And he was very clearly planning to enjoy this particular errand. Mireille watched them from the kitchen window. She had been watching for about 4 minutes, long enough to finish her second cup of tea, long enough to decide she was not going to meet them at the door. She let them knock. The woman who came to answer was 41 years old, 5'4", wearing a washed linen shirt the color of old paper, and a pair of reading glasses pushed up into dark hair that had gone silver at the temples. She was not dressed to impress. She was dressed the way people dress when they are so far past needing to impress anyone that the concept no longer registers as relevant. "Garrett," Mireille said, opening the door. Garrett Leyland was 54. He had the look of a man who had spent 30 years being aggressively photographed for industry profiles. Jaw forward, chest out, the particular cultivated handsomeness of someone who had worked very hard to appear effortless. He wore a mackage wool coat that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. The woman beside him, who introduced herself immediately and without being asked as Sadie, Garrett's fiancée, wore a puffer jacket with a fur-trimmed hood and carried a canvas tote printed with a boutique real estate brand that was, notably, Garrett's own company. "We were in the neighborhood," Garrett said, which was an obvious lie. Nobody was ever casually in the neighborhood of Mireille's street. There was a quiet, leafy crescent in Rosedale, not glamorous, not photogenic, just old and solid and deeply rooted, the kind of Calgary neighborhood that people like Garrett Leyland had spent 15 years trying to demolish and redevelop. "You weren't," Mireille said pleasantly. "Come in." She had been Nadia's mother for 38 years and Garrett's mother-in-law for 6 of them. She had been his ex-mother-in-law for 3. She had never once raised her voice in his presence, a fact that had always made him visibly uncomfortable, as though her calm were a kind of accusation he didn't know how to answer. The front hall was narrow and smelled of cedar and old wood. The floors were original fir, worn smooth and warm. Garrett glanced around with the professional assessment of a man who could not look at any interior without calculating its tear-down value. He noted the cracked plaster near the baseboard, the vintage radiators, the glass transom above the kitchen door. "You haven't done anything with the place," Garrett said. "I've taken excellent care of it," Mireille said. She led them into the dining room. The table was a long piece of live-edge maple that her late husband had built from a tree that had come down in a storm the year they were married. Garrett pulled out a chair without being invited to sit. Sadie sat beside him, tucking the tote bag under the chair and smoothing her jacket. "Can I offer you tea?" Mireille said. It was not a question, quite. "We won't be long," Garrett said, already opening the manila folder. "This is a courtesy visit, really. I wanted to handle this personally rather than through the lawyers, out of respect for the history between our families." Mireille sat down. She folded her hands on the table. She had hands that were accustomed to work. She had spent 22 years as a structural engineer before moving into consulting, and they rested on the maple surface with a kind of settled authority. "The history between our families," she repeated. "You know the project I'm developing on the north side of the neighborhood. The Calder Commons build." Garrett slid a sheet across the table. It was an architectural rendering, glassy and optimistic, showing a cluster of mixed-use towers where a row of post-war houses currently "We've been acquiring the remaining parcels in the zone for the past 18 months. We're very close to breaking ground." "I know about Calder Commons," Mireille said. "Then you know this house is inside the development boundary." Garrett pulled the folder toward him and withdrew the quitclaim document, setting it on the table between them. "We've been patient. We bought out your neighbors on both sides, the Newans in March, the McTavishes in July. Honestly, Mireille, you're the last holdout. And at this point, the delay is costing my investors real money." He produced a certified check from the inside pocket of his coat and placed it beside the document. $650,000. That is well above current market value for a property in this condition. You could buy something beautiful, something new. Sadie leaned forward slightly, looking at the house the way Garrett had taught her to look at properties, with appetite. "There's so much you could do with that kind of money," Sadie said, with the tone of someone explaining a concept to an elderly person. "Honestly, a condo in the Beltline, or even Canmore if you wanted the mountain air. You'd have money left over. You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance and heating bills on a place this size. She glanced at the cracked plaster. Especially with all the upkeep something this old must need. Mireille looked at Sadie for a long moment. Not unkindly. The way you might look at a confident forecast that you know is about to be revised. Garrett, Mireille said, turning back to him. Do you actually understand what this house is? A 1948 bungalow on a double lot, Garrett said. Assessed at $540, which is why our offer is generous. This house, Mireille said, was designated a heritage property under the province's Historical Resources Act 14 years ago. The designation covers the structure, the mature tree canopy on the lot, and the original brick outbuilding in the back. It also covers a 15-meter buffer zone from the property line in every direction. Garrett's hand went still on the table. Your Calder Commons development boundary, Mireille continued, her voice carrying the same unhurried precision she had used for 2 decades in engineering assessments, runs 6 meters from my north property line. The heritage buffer extends 15. She tilted her head slightly. You can't build within 9 meters of where you're planning to break ground. The room was quiet. The radiator ticked. That's not possible, Garrett said. My lawyers ran a full title search. There was no heritage designation on this property. The designation is registered with Alberta Culture and Tourism, not with the Land Title Registry, Mireille said. It's an easy thing to miss if your lawyers are looking in the wrong place, which, apparently, they were. Garrett's jaw worked. He reached for his phone. You can call David Rourke, Mireille said. He's your general counsel. I imagine he's already had a very interesting morning. Garrett looked at her. For the first time since he'd walked in, he looked at her the way a person looks at something they have badly misjudged. How do you know who my general counsel is? He called me, Mireille said, 3 days ago. Apex Properties, the investment group that's been financing your Calder Commons build, commissioned an independent title and heritage review as part of their final due diligence. Their research team found the designation on Tuesday. She reached into the pocket of her linen shirt and set her phone on the table, screen up. It was open to an email thread. Garrett leaned forward involuntarily, his eyes moving across the text. The email was from a woman named Rosalind Ochterberg, Senior Director of Acquisitions at Apex Properties, addressed to Mireille. Garrett stopped reading. He picked up the phone and read the email again. Then he set it down very carefully, the way a person sets something down when their hands are not entirely steady. He had been standing in this dining room for 11 minutes, holding a certified check for $650,000, feeling like a man dispensing charity. The email on Mireille's phone was not about charity. It was about the heritage buffer. It was about the development boundary, and it was about the very specific, very terminal implication that Calder Commons, as currently designed, could not be built. Not without this house, and this house could not be touched. The Apex financing is contingent on the full development footprint, Garrett said. He was working through it aloud, which was something he only did when he was genuinely frightened. If the north boundary can't be built, the tower density doesn't work, the commercial ratio doesn't work, the entire financing model. He stopped. Collapses, Mireille said. You're being vindictive, Garrett said. His voice had shifted. The professional warmth was entirely gone, replaced by something thin and pressured. This is about Nadia. This is about the divorce. Nadia is 40 years old, and she has her own opinions about the divorce, Mireille said calmly. I have my own opinions about the development of a neighborhood I've lived in for 34 years. You can't just. Garrett's hand came down on the table. Not quite a slam, but close. You have no idea what you're doing. This project is $240 million. There are 43 investors. There are contracts. There are city permits and environmental assessments and a financing structure that has been 18 months in the making. You cannot sit in this house with a piece of provincial heritage paperwork and expect to. Garrett. Mireille's voice did not rise. It simply arrived, with the weight of someone who has calculated every load-bearing point in advance. I didn't apply for the heritage designation 3 weeks ago. I applied for it 14 years ago when the province launched the residential heritage program, and this house, which was designed by Thomas Mawson's apprentice firm in 1948, qualified on 3 separate historical criteria. She paused. I have lived with that designation for 14 years. I have maintained this house in compliance with it for 14 years. I have declined 2 previous approaches from developers in this neighborhood because of it. The designation was always here. Your lawyers simply didn't find it. Sadie had been quiet for several minutes. She was looking at the maple table, at the way the light came through the original single-pane windows and fell across the surface in long, irregular patterns. She was looking at the radiators and the transom glass and the fur floors, and for the first time she seemed to be seeing them as something other than evidence of neglect. Garrett, Sadie said quietly. How much of the financing is already drawn? Garrett didn't answer. The Apex email, Mireille said, turning to Sadie with the same impersonal patience, outlines their position. Their title review identified the heritage buffer. They suspended the funding draw. The project is currently $41 million into a $240 million build. The remaining financing will not be released until the heritage issue is resolved, which, as their legal team has determined, it cannot be. She picked up her phone and turned it face down. What they mean by resolved, Mireille said, is that the development footprint needs to be redesigned. Without this lot, and without the 9 meters on the other side of my property line, the North Tower cannot be built to the density required to make the project financially viable. Apex has given Garrett's company 60 days to propose a redesign. If no viable redesign is submitted, they will withdraw their commitment and seek recovery of the drawn funds. Garrett stood up. His chair scraped back hard. He crossed to the window and stood with his back to the room, looking out at Mireille's backyard, the old crabapple tree, the brick outbuilding with its copper-green roof, the garden beds that were brown and dormant now in the gray November light. I can fight the designation, Garrett said. He was talking to the window. There are grounds to appeal a heritage designation if the property owner can demonstrate economic hardship. I can make that case. You can, Mireille said. The appeal process runs approximately 22 to 26 months and requires a full heritage impact assessment, a public consultation period, and a review by the Provincial Historic Resources Board. Apex's 60-day window will expire well before the first hearing date. Garrett turned from the window. Why didn't you say anything? He said. When we were buying out the street. When we made our first approach to you, 8 months ago, through the realtor. Why didn't you just say the house was heritage designated? Because you didn't ask, Mireille said. Your realtor's letter offered me $500,000 for an unconditional sale within 30 days, and included a paragraph about how my property was ideally positioned for redevelopment. It didn't ask any questions. It assumed. She reached for her teacup. It had been sitting there since before they arrived, and it was cold now, but she drank it anyway. I have answered every inquiry I received, with a declining letter that included the designation number and the relevant section of the Historical Resources Act, Mireille said. Your realtor didn't forward those to you, or your lawyers didn't read them, or someone in the process assumed the designation could be managed. I don't know which. But I've been clear about my position for 8 months. Garrett came back to the table. He sat down heavily. The mackage coat seemed to weigh more than it had when he walked in. Mireille. His voice had changed again. This time it was not pressured or thin. It was something closer to exhausted. I need this project. I have my own money in this. Personal guarantees on the financing. If Apex pulls out, and I can't cover the recoupment I'm looking at, it's not just the company. It's everything. Mireille looked at him. She had known him for 9 years, since Nadia had brought him home for the first time. Self-made, high energy, impatient with anyone who moved slower than he did. She had watched him charm rooms and manage investors and absorb Nadia's steadiness like a resource he was slowly depleting. She had watched the marriage thin out the way certain materials thin under sustained stress. Invisibly at first, then all at once. She had also watched Nadia rebuild her life in the 3 years since. Quietly, methodically, the way her daughter had always done things. Nadia was a structural engineer like her mother. She had designed 3 buildings in downtown Calgary that would outlast everyone in this room. She had moved into a condo in Inglewood and planted tomatoes on the balcony and started running marathons. She was fine. She was more than fine. She was, Mireille thought, entirely herself, in a way she hadn't been for several years. I'm not doing this to hurt you, Garrett, Mireille said. Then let me redesign around the buffer. Give me the exact dimensions. Let me bring in a new architect and rework the north section. I can give you the survey coordinates, yes. You have them already. They're on file with the city. Any competent architect can work with them. Will you? Is there any version of this where you work with us? Where we come to some kind of arrangement that allows the build to proceed? Mireille considered this for a moment. Not because she was undecided, but because she wanted to be precise. You can redesign the project within the legal boundaries and resubmit to Apex. That is entirely within your rights. I will not interfere with a design that respects the heritage buffer. I will continue to maintain and inhabit this house. Those two things can coexist. But the North Tower? I'm not a developer, Mireille said. I can't tell you whether a redesigned project pencils out for your investors. That's your problem to solve. She paused. But I will say this. A smaller, better designed development on this block would have more goodwill from the neighbors who are still here. From the city planners who've been watching Calder Commons with some skepticism. And from the residents' associations that have been opposing this project at council for 14 months. Whether that goodwill translates to something financially useful for you is not my department. Sadie looked up. The residents' associations have been opposing it, she said. Consistently, Mireille said. Sadie looked at Garrett. He did not look back. He picked up the manila folder. He did not pick up the certified check. He looked at it for a moment and then left it on the table, which told Mireille everything she needed to know about the current state of his liquidity. A man with real money would have taken the check back. A man running on leverage and confidence would leave it, because picking it up would feel like admitting something. I'll have David call you, Garrett said. He stood, and Sadie stood, and they moved toward the hall in a configuration that was noticeably less coordinated than when they'd arrived. Mireille walked them to the door. At the threshold, Garrett turned back. He looked at the house again, the transom, the fir floors, the cedar smell. He looked at it like a man who was beginning to understand that he had been measuring the wrong things. It's a good house, he said. He seemed surprised by his own words. It's a very good house, Mireille said. She closed the door. She stood in the front hall for a moment, listening to the Porsche back out of the driveway. Then she walked down the narrow corridor and back into the kitchen. The afternoon light came in, low and gray through the window over the sink. The crabapple tree in the backyard was bare, its branches making sharp angles against the November sky. She put the kettle on. Her phone was on the counter, and it buzzed with a message from Nadia. Not about Garrett. Nadia didn't know he was coming, and Mireille hadn't told her. It was a photo. Nadia at a job site, hard hat, site plans, muddy boots, squinting into some prairie wind. Mireille looked at the photo for a long moment. Her daughter's face clear and focused and entirely present. She typed back, "Beautiful. Which project?" Nadia's reply came in seconds. "Affordable housing on the north side. Design I've been working on for 2 years. City approved the permit this morning." Mireille set the phone down and looked out at the bare crabapple tree. She thought about heritage. Not the legal category, the document number, the provincial registry, the 15-meter buffer zone, but the other kind. The kind that accumulates in wood and light, and the particular way a family learns to be quiet when something important is happening. The kind that her husband had built into a table from a fallen tree, that her daughter had translated into buildings that would stand. Long after the Calder Commons renderings were recycled into something else. The kettle began to whistle. Mireille poured the water over the tea, watched the color bloom out slowly through the water, and drank it while it was still warm. The certified check for $650,000 sat on the maple table in the dining room, unclaimed and already irrelevant. Outside, the city moved on in its ordinary, relentless way, and inside this particular house, designated, protected, and precisely understood, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be.